Demit Omphroy is a testament to the artistry of overcoming adversity. From the soccer field to the canvas, his journey is a vivid portrayal of resilience, reinvention, and self-expression, all while navigating life with multiple sclerosis. Through vibrant art and an inspiring outlook, Demit continues to shape conversations about strength, identity, and creativity.
Thank you so much, Demit, for joining me here on AwareNow to share the space and to share your story. Thank you so much.
Of course, I'm happy to be here.
So let's get right into it. Let's go back a year or more, a few different years to 17. At 17, you were on the cusp of signing with Sporting Lisbon when vision issues led to a diagnosis of optic neuritis, an early indicator of multiple sclerosis, which you were then diagnosed with. So this early unexpected health challenge, it disrupted your promising career in soccer. I guess my first question for you today is, can you share how you coped with this setback and what it was that motivated you to continue pursuing professional soccer despite the uncertainties?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when I was 16 going on 17, it's sort of that year where you decide, like, are you going to go to college or are you going to pursue sort of like the high school to professional route? And in my mind, I was like, I'm going to be a pro soccer. I'm not going to college. I'm going to put everything in soccer. And that was all I really knew at the time. Like, I feel like I identified so heavily as an athlete, and so I put all my eggs in the basket of being a pro athlete. When I got diagnosed with optic neuritis, it was interesting because at the time, I actually didn't know I had optic neuritis. When I was in Portugal, I was experiencing this sort of like vision fluttering where like I woke up one morning and I felt a little tired, but I felt like really foggy in my right eye. And I feel like I would put water on my face and it just didn't come back that morning. But it was sort of like, when you're just tired, you're like, I just feel kind of groggy. It didn't really feel like anything. Then when I started getting onto the soccer pitch is when I really realized like something was up. Like I couldn't see out of my eye. And when I saw the doctors in Portugal, like a day or two later, their initial reaction was like, oh, if this is hereditary, like you're going to go blind. And so it wasn't initially this feeling of like, oh, well, I have optic neuritis. Optic neuritis is common. It was more of like, yeah, we don't know what's wrong with you. We have to figure out whether or not like you're going to even have your vision anymore. And that was such a blow for me at the time because I had really decided that I wasn't going to do school anymore. I was going to be an athlete. I was going to be a pro soccer player. And in my mind, being a pro soccer player meant having to leave home and go to Europe and actually pursue the dream of it. Because that's like the big leagues, that's where you really make it. And yeah, for me, when I had that initial diagnosis of them not knowing what was going on, I actually was really scared. I sort of felt like everything that I had done felt like it was sort of ending and I had no control over what was going on. And then I had to move back home. And moving back home was a really tough blow as well because I really like set out to live in Portugal. I'd started getting comfortable there. It had been a year. I turned 17 there. It was just everything had gone exactly how I was planning for it to go along my path. And then, and then that setback happened. Getting the diagnosis of optic neuritis was maybe a little more promising to know that, I'm not going to go blind, which was a positive, but I am going to have this thing at the time. And every single time I would do any sort of physical exertion and I would get my body temperature would rise. My vision would flutter again. It would start to get really foggy and go out. And so when I was coming back home and trying to sort of cope with this bout of optic neuritis, it was just difficult because it was always like a reminder that you can't run too hard. You can't do these things. I know you want to be a pro, which requires you like full exertion constantly, and you can't even jog, And I think that was really scary because like my body felt fine, my legs felt fine, everything felt fine. I was like, what the heck is going on with my eye? So I think to go back to like, how did I deal with this sort of how did I deal with like the diagnosis of it and how did I maybe overcome it? I think it actually took a lot of time of accepting what was going on, and understanding that maybe the route that I had in my head wasn't necessarily the exact way I was going to get to being a professional soccer player. And it gave me a little bit more motivation to come back and regroup and think about why this was happening and how I could at least keep the dream alive. And so for me, it was just about getting healthy, trying to get on a regiment. I think also at the time at 18, I didn't know I had MS. I wasn't diagnosed until 21. So at 18, it was sort of this unknown of what was going on. But it definitely ended any sort of contract talks. It ended sort of any professional career, which just meant that if I wanted to keep that dream alive, I had to go back to college. And I think that route served me better, actually, when I think of it now. Hindsight, I feel like what a great experience for me to come out of that and also get an education and be able to learn about myself and then improve as a soccer player. And so I feel like at the time when I was going through it, I just kept thinking about, I can't let this diagnosis take away this dream. And I felt like I kept that alive through my 4 years of college until my fourth year, actually. When I turned 21 is when I actually got the diagnosis. And I remember thinking that this is the thing that took away the contract when I was 17. And no way am I going to let this thing define the way the rest of my life goes. I'm not going to let this thing take away my dream. And I don't want this to be the way that the script is written. And I figured I would do whatever it took. If I was like gonna keep training until like my legs fell off, I was just like, I needed to figure out everything that I needed to do to be able to compete. And that meant getting on treatment. That meant taking care of my stress levels and taking care of my body and the stuff that I put in my body. And I just got really, really regimented and prepared in making sure that I was putting myself in the best possible scenario to accomplish that dream. So I feel like it's all easy to talk about it now, but when I was going through it, it was really, really tricky and really tough to be having to deal with that at like 16, 17, and then 21 again. But I think for me, I felt like I had a time limit on how much I was supposed to be able to enjoy an active lifestyle. I didn't like this idea that MS sort of says, well, like, you know, as you get older, you're not actually supposed to be as active. You know, you're not supposed to have as much mobility. And, you know, we don't actually think that you're going to be able to exert yourself in the way that you want to because you have this disease that can be debilitating. And I think that narrative for me, it didn't sit well. And I use that as sort of like my fuel to my fire to continue going. And I am so grateful I had that mentality. It was really difficult, but I'm happy I kept that through line throughout my career, and you know, it gave me some of the best years of my life playing professionally. And I went on to I went on to become the first player in Major League Soccer with multiple sclerosis, which was
That's awesome.
a cool accomplishment. I don't necessarily know if I was trying to accomplish that. I think in my mind, I just wanted to be a professional soccer player. And I think that was a lifelong dream I'd always had as a little kid. And doing it with having a disease as well was maybe just another pin to add to my accomplishment of just feeling like happy about it. But it wasn't necessarily a goal in mind. I just wanted to prove to myself that I could accomplish it, and I'm really grateful for that.
That's incredible. Yeah, I did not know that you were the first. That's amazing. You know, so let's fast forward a little bit now. So after stepping away from professional soccer, you ventured into the art world, developing a style that's often been compared to Picasso, to Matisse. So what inspired this transition? And I guess, how did your experiences as an athlete influence your artistic expression?
Yeah, I guess the transition to, I guess I'm just gonna like caveat this whole thing by, I'm sorry if I've talked for a long time, okay? Because I have a tendency to just go in depth about stuff, but it's okay. We're here and we're talking. But what I was going to say was, as becoming a professional soccer player and sort of retiring from that career, I actually had a pretty large gap of time before I came like a real, I don't know, professional artist, I guess, or like identified as like an artist as in my career. I had some time where I was behind the camera now, being in front of the camera on the soccer pitch and sort of like having that life as like a professional athlete. When I decided to retire from that, being behind the camera ended up being like another way for me to express. And that's the way that I looked at my creativity on the soccer field. It's still a version of myself that I wanted to share, and it manifested through photo and video and creating stories, and a lot of storytelling for me was really sort of truer to me as an individual than just being a soccer player or just being a photographer, a videographer. I wanted to do so many things with what my talent is of storytelling, and I wanted to share my experiences. And overall, it just helped me feel like I could be more understood. And I think having the disease as well, I think that's something that can sort of feel like it's unrelatable at times, especially because it doesn't always show, it's just more mental at times. And so, yeah, I think that idea of just wanting to be understood in different levels, I think came from outlets of different expression. So I went through a couple of years of being like a photographer, videographer, and creating creative direction and being in a lot of shoots and being around soccer pitches and around athletes and still speaking my language. And then around 2020 is when I really sort of had like a realization about what I felt was like my true form of expression. And I think painting for me was always something that I did at a young age. My mom was an artist and my dad was a soccer player. So I was like a perfect split between the two. And up until that point where I decided to start being a painter and really painting full time, I was still sort of honing the soccer side. I was still around the game. I was still around sports. I was still around a lot of things that I identified with. And stepping into the painter and the artistic route, I think that was really scary, actually. I feel like if anything, I had to take a leap of faith. And I think it was that realization where it was like, you can continue doing this if you'd like to, and you've done great stuff, but you've made it this far, and I've always had this itch and desire to share everything that I'm going through with painting. I just never was able to tie making a living off of it. I was always just sort of like, I don't want to be this starving artist. And then I got to this point during the pandemic where I was like, I think it's okay to be a starving artist. At this point, everything is upside down. Like, I might as well just pursue what I love and put effort towards things that I truly want to do. And art really took a front seat for me. And I remember, it's so crazy. I remember being in my studio at the time. I was like a little studio. I had just broken up with my girlfriend of like 9 years, and I was just by myself. Yeah, it felt like a divorce. It was like I was by myself, and I remember just sitting like with a notepad, and just, I think I had bought some like crayons, and I just was like, you got to paint. Like, I was sad, I was low, I was dealing with my own MS stuff, and I just was like, you got to get out of this somehow. And if it's not manifesting in your work at work, like, you got to get it out somehow. And so my outlet became my sketchbook and doing these little paintings and drawings on these sketchbooks that I had, and they became really therapeutic, and to the point where I was like nonstop making these different creations, these different line drawings, and my whole perspective was, you got to be able to do this without looking at stuff. If you can't create from your own mind, you're not really creating for yourself. You got to create for yourself. Do whatever you got to do. Turn off the internet and figure out how to do this on your own, because you never know what happens if social media goes away. What happens if internet goes, electricity? And I mean, during the COVID time, we were sort of like, what happens if we don't have a house anymore? What are gonna, And so I think it's just like, it was one of those realizations where, because we didn't know what was going to happen, my only perspective was to focus on the things that can help me feel happiness, and I think when I started to do that, I started to notice how many other people also really loved the stuff that I was doing. And I don't want to say that I was doing it for them, but having that additional sort of like motivation or validation from my circle of friends that were like, "Oh my God, Demit, that's so cool." And I was like, "Stop, like, you don't think this is really cool, do you? Like, it was just a drawing." And they were like, "No, I would buy that." And I was like, "No, you wouldn't." But also, like, how much are you talking? Like, the concept of like selling artwork to me was just so foreign. It just didn't even, I was like, "You would pay for these drawings?" And I think in my head, it was so far-fetched because I had made the decision that it wasn't a possibility, and I think coming to this realization of being able to earn money, but money not being the main focus, but leading with creating from my heart, or creating from within, and allowing whatever came from that to come, whether it was money or those opportunities or whatever. I think the most gratifying thing was I was making the decision to create for myself. And in a fairly quick, like, couple months, I ended up actually doing stuff with the Picasso family and doing big pieces for people and companies and things that I just never could have even imagined. And when I think about the leap of faith that it takes, whether you're an athlete, whether you are deciding to do an 8K, whether you are deciding to change your career or whatever it is, or deciding to get on a medication for MS, I think there's a leap of faith where you just got to follow your heart, even if it means that things are going to be shaken up a little bit. And it's some of the most, I would say, the toughest times that I've faced, but also the most gratifying, and I guess the biggest lessons that I've learned have happened from those moments of taking the leap of faith. And I think that it was definitely like a calculated leap of faith. It wasn't just like, "Oh, let me just try this." I think I had been sort of ruminating on this idea for so long, to the point where I was like, I actually can't live without making this decision anymore. And I think, like, those moments that I had in making those decisions sort of helped me to get to where I am today. And the comparisons, or even the color palettes, whether they're comparing style or color or just overall feeling of pieces to Picasso and Matisse, I think that's like so crazy to me, because I've obviously learned about them growing up, and I continue to go see their work here and in Spain, and gosh, all over the world. I've sort of studied their work and seen their work. But to even be like in the same conversation of that, I think is gratifying. But if anything, I also love the idea that my work is still unique to me, and it's something that I'm continuing to hone with my style and my voice, and just continuing to push myself as an artist and develop. I think that's sort of how we are as individuals, right? Like, we just sort of continue evolving and continue growing. And for me, that's exactly what it's like to be an artist. And I think it's interesting to sort of see my progression of my body of work change. And I think that's sort of like my journal of entries that remind me of what I was going through those times, So I feel like that's at least the legacy of some artwork that I have right now, at least for me, that is helping me to understand, like, where I started and sort of where I'm growing and where I'm going towards,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I like how you'd mentioned a moment ago, just that leap of faith, and I hear you, and that it's I've come to understand, I'm sure you agree with this, that it's not enough to trust the journey. You have to surrender to it, right? It's like, you can't like tiptoe into it. Like, you just have to be all in. So let's talk more about the fact that, your artwork, so again, they're vibrant, playful themes of life, death, family. How has living with MS influenced the themes and some of the emotions that you convey in your art?
That's a great question. I actually would say MS hasn't quite made its way fully into my artwork just yet. And that is because MS for me has been something that I've kept in the back of my mind for a really long time. And that's, I think, maybe a sort of denial in a way that I have had it, because it can be really scary, and I think what I'm starting to understand with myself, with some more leaps of faith that I've taken in the past year, is that health is extremely important. Health is extremely important for my own creation and being able to think clearly and to create and to express myself properly and ultimately be able to express and feel understood. And so MS actually is extremely important to my journey as an artist. And I think I'm just starting to understand that and make that connection between the two and sort of seeing like, I can't just burn the candle at both ends and then expect myself to come and create these masterpieces of work. It takes so much time to even get in the right mindset, and let alone like create a piece of artwork that you want to show to somebody, which is like such a reveal of vulnerability and like internal self-reflection, and so the idea that not having a clear mind through all this, which I feel like a lot of the MS stuff that I've been having in the past, like, is actually, again, my avoidance of having the disease. And I think having that reminder through these calls and actually like hearing your story and hearing other people's story who live with MS makes me feel like I'm not as alone in it. And I think I might be like sort of tailing away from your question a little bit, but I think MS for me actually, if I was to relate it to being an athlete, I think I have been nothing but sort of vigilant in the preparation to do everything that I can now to sort of be in my best version of myself that I can control, right? So like I think about as an athlete, you take your ice baths, you watch your film, you make sure you sleep enough, you train, you put the right stuff in your body, hopefully you enjoy some things as well, like with your family, friends or partners or whatever. But ultimately, like you have your regiment to make sure that your body is in the best state that it could be. And then you have your game and then you hopefully perform well. I think with MS as well, it's sort of like you have your relationship with your doctor or hopefully a neurologist, somebody to help you through this. And whether or not you decide to get on drug therapy is really a personal decision. But for me, I decided actually this past year, like I wanted to get on drug therapy. I want to be proactive about my disease. I want to make sure I'm doing everything that I can to take care of my body. So I have the longest life that I could possibly live, as symptom free as I possibly can. But again, that's out of my control. I'm just thinking about the things that I could do to sort of give myself the best runway of career. And when I think about art now, I think about health being really important to being able to express. Art for me has been all about expression and sharing versions of myself with other people and really just sort of just like expressing what I'm going through. And I can feel the importance of health coming through that and my own mentality with family and friends and why it's important for them to also know that I'm taking care of myself as well. So I feel like in a way I can see myself as I'm getting better about taking care of myself, how that's actually helping me be a better artist, maybe internally. I think that's like the stuff between the ears, I feel like is really the most important part that I've learned when I've been creating. Is like, I can't just like have a tired day, like in soccer some days where you could just like run through it, and like, yeah, I just like ran through the whole thing and I just toughed it out, but I need to lay down. I think art doesn't let me do that. Art is like, you can go ahead and try to make stuff. It's not going to be stuff that you're going to want to show or be proud of or anything. It's like, you really got to be in the right mindset. And so I think in terms of taking care of my controlling my controllables, I've done my fair share of like trial and error with what I can try to control with art. And I feel like, if anything, what's kept me the sharpest is like making sure my health is good, making sure everything that I can do is sort of like, I guess, checked off of my list. And for the most part, I feel like I've been, doing as well as I can be, but again, I have my days as well, so I feel like we are human in that. I don't know if I answered your question, by the way.
That is fine, because what was shared was what needed to be shared. So regardless of what the question was,
Sorry, you said artworks described as vibrant and playful. Okay. Don't know where I was going with that.
Okay. Where
That's
you
all
took
right.
a,
This is the most real version of like how my brain works. I'll just like start going with stuff,
and this is how conversation should be. You start with going one direction, you end up someplace completely different, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So in terms of your MS diagnosis, how you just mentioned, let's sort of keeping that as sort of running in the background, right? How has, when you do share your story about MS, how has sharing that journey impacted? How do you hope that perhaps it will impact public perceptions of MS? I guess my question would be, what message do you hope to convey to others when you do share your story of MS, people who are having these similar challenges?
I guess the story that I would love to convey to people who have MS or that are even just going through difficult times in life with their health or with anything really. I think my biggest takeaway is mentality. And I think that always is a really tricky thing to talk to someone about, is like trying to change your mentality about things, because sometimes you just don't want to, I think that's like the hardest thing to get through is the voice that is telling you like, you don't need to do that, or you shouldn't have to do that, or you can't do that. And the way that I have always tried to think about, at least trying to share with people, if I was to sort of impart any sort of like hope or wisdom, I think that my biggest thing I try to share is like, there's more than one way to achieve what you want, right? And I think like in my head, I really wanted to be a pro soccer player, and I would just put out to the universe I wanted to be a pro soccer player, and I didn't really think about the different ways that I could have gotten there, and I think like I thought I was going to do it right out of high school, and then it didn't happen. I thought the dream was over, and I just didn't really realize that my life was, or the universe, or whatever higher power there is, sort of telling me that that it wasn't time yet, and I still was able to achieve what I wanted to achieve in the long run. I just needed to maybe get an education, and I need to be closer to home, and I need to like make sure my health was in order. And there are all these things that I'm grateful for that to happen, like that have happened to me that I guess sort of I didn't realize was happening. And I remember sort of thinking about this. I would do these patient advocate talks where I would speak to patients who also have MS, as like a young athlete who just retired from soccer. And I was speaking to people who were my age, but also twice my age or in their 70s. And they were like, what do I have to learn from you, man? You're like a soccer player. You're telling me I have a way more developed MS than you, and you can't really tell me what to be doing. And in a way, it was sort of like a reality check. It's like not everybody gets to have this sort of very minimal symptom life with MS. It's such a spectrum of different of MS diagnoses in different patients. And the one thing that I think was the through line was the physical aspect doesn't change what you can accomplish with something. So like for example, like if I want to run, or if I want to do an 8K and I have difficulty in running or walking, and there's still ways that you could still complete that 8K in different ways, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be in a competition either. It could be like your version of the 8K, which could be getting down the stairs or walking down the street or going to the mailbox, and it was the idea of saying like, your 8K doesn't need to be the 8K. You know what I mean? It's just about creating these narratives for yourself and almost challenging yourself to say like, I'm going to still do what I can to accomplish what I can. And it may not be what they can do, but I'm going to do this for me. And I think that was my takeaway from, or at least what I wanted people to take away from when I would talk to people. And even now when I'm sharing my experience, it's really just, we can really alter our own narrative of how we want to live our life. Like we write the script of our life. Nobody else gets to say that. And our body doesn't get to tell us whether or not we get to be happy, and happiness sometimes is figuring out how we find maybe the common ground between like what we want to do and what we physically can do, right? And I think my biggest challenge actually is how to find that happiness or find that that through line when it feels like the darkest. And I always remember. I was talking to, I think, my dad about this, and my dad or my mom, if anybody watches this, sorry, mom and dad, I don't know, mixing up was one or the other, but like, we would talk about skiing, and as a skier, you could be skiing through trees and seeing all the different trees. It can be really scary, and like, oh my God, I'm hit these trees, and a lot of the times really advanced skiers, you see the path. You just find the path. You don't think about all the obstacles around you, whatever those obstacles may be. There could be a hole, there could be an animal, there could be trees. But I think you just continue to look for the path. And in my mind, the darkest times that I've had is just figuring out, trying to find your next step. You're just trying to find the next step, whatever that may be. And I think, again, another bad analogy or a bad metaphor, which is like, there's only one way to eat elephant, right? I think it's like, instead of thinking about trying to get through all this stuff or the complexity of the situations we're in, it's just taking the next step and just trying to figure out how to get to that next path of light that you could see. And I think remembering that there is a next step for our next path for all of us, whatever that may be. And I think not considering everyone else's journeys, because everyone else's journeys are different. It's just about ourselves, and there's no sense in comparing, and I need to take my own advice on that, like the no comparing thing. But I think that's my takeaway. If I could leave that to somebody, if I could speak to my younger self, is just to try to keep finding the path, just keep trying to find the path, whatever that may be, however slow that may be. I think it's just a step forward in some way. I think that's the continuation that I need to keep going with. There's so much that I have to learn. I think that I have these mentalities sometimes where I can like make my decision and think that that's the way things are. And I feel like the more I've allowed myself to be more of like a sponge in these new situations that I'm in, I end up learning so much about myself. And it's crazy because, I'm the oldest that I've ever been. And of course, as I've gotten through life, I'm like, I remember when I was like 23 and I was, man, I know so much, and we really don't know as much as we think. And I feel like we have so much to learn from others. And I think what I learned about myself is my mind and my body are really powerful. I think it's about trying to take care of those things first. Listening to myself and loving myself first has been the greatest steps that I could be taking on my journey with MS, on my journey with career and soccer and all these things, and making sure that I'm championing myself. And again, like I've learned about how resilient I am as a person, even through my hardest times. And all of that came from making sure that, I was really loving myself first. I think that I think when you sort of grow up and you try to do these things on your own, and you sort of like, I found myself sort of like not necessarily recognizing who I was in different situations because I just was trying to fit in and blend in and compare and try to do all these things that just was outside of me. And then when I started to just sort of reflect on myself and figure out what I could do to control my own life and my own journey and myself, I feel like championing myself and loving myself was like the best start that I could have taken in this journey. And I think that goes through with art and soccer and even as my journey with MS that I kind of have for the rest of my life. I think that's the most important thing to me.
So well said. And yeah, that it does apply to all versions of you and all expressions of you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me here, for sharing your story, for helping all of us become a bit more aware now. Thank you so much, Demit.
Yeah, man.